I met him on a night when the hospital felt heavier than usual, the air thick with antiseptic and fatigue. Tyler was 25, a motorcycle crash patient with a broken femur and a grin that didn't belong in a trauma unit. I had been doing this work for over 20 years, long enough to know when someone's pain was deeper than the charts showed. He asked about my name, about how I managed to stay so calm, and when I told him it came with the job, he said it was comforting to watch someone move through chaos without losing their center. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. He noticed the small things, how I tied my hair before a code, how I always checked a patient's hands first. There was a warmth in his eyes that reached past the sterile light and the hum of machines. When his discharge papers were ready, I expected the usual quick goodbye. Instead, he waited outside with a paper cup of coffee and a bouquet from the hospital gift shop. He said he wanted to see me again. 6 months later, we stood in front of a county clerk, laughing about how neither of us believed in big weddings. He promised we'd build something real, a new start after years of drifting. I believed him because I wanted to. After decades of saving lives, I thought maybe it was my turn to be saved. When Marissa first mentioned the idea of building a home, it felt like a blessing wrapped in kindness. She was a public school teacher, still grieving her husband, and the insurance payout of $170,000 had been sitting untouched in her account. She told us there was a vacant lot her late husband had left behind, a patch of land with cracked soil and overgrown weeds. She said it deserved a second life, just like her son. Tyler's eyes lit up, and for a moment, so did mine. It felt like we were being handed a future we hadn't yet dared to imagine. I had saved $330,000 over 2 decades of double shifts and missed holidays. Together, the numbers looked solid. $500,000 could build something lasting, something beautiful. Tyler didn't have the money, but he had ideas. He spent nights sketching rooms on scrap paper, talking about where sunlight would fall in the mornings, how we'd paint the walls ivory, and how the kitchen should face east because he liked waking to light. I listened, half smiling, telling myself that love wasn't about equal halves, but about shared intention. When construction began, I could almost smell the promise in the fresh-cut wood. White walls, warm oak floors, wide windows that opened to the sky. The air carried the scent of paint and new beginnings. Yet, under the joy, a quiet voice in me stirred when Marissa suggested putting the deed in Tyler's name to help him build credit. I hesitated, but she said it would strengthen his future, and he nodded like it was a small thing. I signed the papers anyway, convincing myself that security wasn't just about ownership, it was about trust. I didn't know then that paper dreams can burn the fastest. The first signs were small, the kind you almost forgive before you realize they are growing roots. Tyler started sleeping in late, leaving dishes in the sink and staring at his phone when I spoke. He said he was thinking about his future, that he needed to focus on his education. The warmth that used to fill our evenings turned into long stretches of silence. I kept telling myself it was just stress, that young men sometimes retreat before they rise. One morning after my night shift, he sat across the kitchen table, his face serious but calm. He said there were grant programs he could apply for, but our marriage made him ineligible. The words sounded harmless at first. He spoke about independence, about wanting to finish his degree without relying on me. He said it was just paperwork, temporary, a way to qualify for aid. I asked if it was even legal. He smiled and said no one needed to know. I had spent 20 years building a life of order and responsibility. Signing false documents went against everything I believed in. Yet, I wanted to believe in him more than in the rules. My hand shook when I picked up the pen. The papers were cold under my fingers, thick and final. I wrote my name as if it still meant safety. When I looked up, he was smiling, but not the way he used to. His expression changed, sharp and mocking. He said it had been easier than he thought. He told me I had been a stepping stone, that he had what he wanted now. The house, the credit, the story. I sat there, staring at the man who had used my heart like collateral. $330,000, 20 years of labor, and every ounce of faith I had in love, all gone with a signature. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just felt the silence closing in, heavy and clean, like the moment before a wound starts to heal. Marissa opened the door, wearing a housecoat, her face pale with confusion as she saw me standing there. I told her I needed to talk, that it was about her son. She led me into the kitchen, the smell of coffee and lemon polish filling the air. I spoke quietly, but each word carried weight. I told her everything: the fake divorce, the house in his name, the way he laughed after I signed. At first, she just sat there staring at her hands, then her jaw tightened. Her spoon stopped stirring. The disbelief in her eyes hardened into something sharper. She said we should go see him. Her voice was calm, but I could hear something breaking underneath. We drove in silence to the house I had paid for. The lawn was uncut, the blinds half closed, and a stack of delivery boxes sat by the door. She parked 2 houses down and told me to go in first. She wanted to hear how he talked when he thought no one was listening. Inside, the air was thick with stale food and arrogance. Tyler sat on the couch, game controller in hand, feet on the coffee table. He didn't even look up. He called me a charity case, said the divorce papers had already been filed, that I should stop showing up like some desperate ex. I stood still, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. I asked him if he ever felt ashamed. He laughed. Marissa stepped out then, her footsteps sharp against the wood, his face drained of color. He called her mom, but she didn't respond. She walked up to him and said she had heard every word. She asked if this was what he had become, if this cruelty was how he honored his father's memory. He tried to explain, to reach for excuses, but she cut him off. Her voice was low and steady when she said he had lost the right to his father's name. When he tried to speak again, her hand moved before words could. The slap was sharp, final, and the room fell silent. She turned to me, eyes wet but clear, and said we would make this right. Then she told him to leave the house. He said it was his name on the deed. She said it was her land and her conscience, and both refused to hold him any longer. Marissa kept her promise. A week later, she introduced me to Dana, a calm woman with sharp eyes and a desk stacked with case files. Dana listened without judgment as I told her everything, from the wire transfers that drained my account to the text Tyler sent thanking me for the house. She asked for proof, and I gave her a folder full of receipts, screenshots, and bank statements. "Numbers never lie," she said. Together, we built a timeline that showed exactly how much of myself I had poured into that house. Filing the civil claim felt less like revenge and more like breathing again. Dana explained the process, every form and court date marked in quiet precision. At the hearing, Tyler tried to look confident, wearing a wrinkled shirt and a tie that didn't match. He said it had all been a misunderstanding, that emotions had gotten messy. Dana slid a printed copy of his text across the table. "Thanks for the house. It's mine now." The judge barely spoke after that. The ruling came fast. Tyler would pay $1,200 a month for 5 years, with enforced collection if he missed a payment. He started working night shifts at a logistics warehouse, earning $17 an hour. Word reached me through Marissa that he complained about back pain and exhaustion. Meanwhile, my life began to stretch open again. The first restitution check bought a new mattress, firm and clean, a place to rest without memories. The second paid for a weekend trip to Seattle, where I walked along the harbor and felt anonymous in the best way. The third funded a Spanish class at the community college. Each check arrived like a quiet apology from the universe. It wasn't about getting even, it was about balance. Justice, I learned, isn't fire or fury. It is paperwork, patience, and the quiet decision to rebuild. Every month when I deposited his payment, I didn't think of loss anymore. I thought of progress. A year passed quietly, marked not by milestones but by peace. I had moved into a small apartment near the river, where mornings smelled of coffee and rain on metal railings. The world felt smaller, but lighter. I worked my shifts, came home to silence and found comfort in it. Healing, I realized, doesn't announce itself. It just settles in one day, soft and steady, like breath returning after a long dive. Marissa came by one evening with a manila envelope and a bottle of red wine. She looked older but somehow softer, like someone who had walked through her own storm. She handed me the envelope and said it wasn't a gift, it was a correction. Inside was the land deed, now in my name. I didn't know what to say. We sat on the balcony as the sun dipped behind the trees, drinking quietly, not needing to fill the silence. Forgiveness didn't come with words. It came with understanding that both of us had lost something and neither of us wanted to carry the weight anymore. A few weeks later, I drove past the old house. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown with weeds, the white walls now gray with neglect. For a moment I stood by the curb, remembering how it once smelled of paint and promise. But there was no ache left, only distance. The house had become what it always was, a structure built on someone else's intentions. As I drove away, I thought about freedom. It wasn't revenge or repayment. It wasn't even the deed sitting in my drawer. It was the quiet inside me, the absence of anger, the steady rhythm of my own pulse. The world hadn't given me closure. I had chosen it, and in that choice, I finally understood what it meant to live with peace and integrity.